Creating an animated sign like this one is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level. Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos, and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools, and let's get started. So as usual, we're going to start by just quickly setting up our file so that we have somewhere to draw. Now for reference, these are the dimensions of the canvas I will be using in this video. It is just the size of my iPad screen because this is a demo, but make sure you use dimensions that work for your own project requirements. Now since this is an animation, you might want to make sure that your dimensions are not too big, otherwise you might have some issues while exporting later in the process. So I would say staying probably below 3000 by 3000 is your best bet, but you can experiment for sure with that. And I'm going to show you how to create your own sign, so you could totally do whatever you want, but if you want to have my illustration as a reference here at the top, the way to do that is going in the wrench icon menu, in the canvas submenu, selecting the reference option and activating that toggle, which is going to let you import a picture. So if you want to download my illustration along with the color palette I will be using in this video, they will both be linked in the description below and they're totally free. But again, this video is about creating your own stuff, and I'm going to give you tips on creating your own color palette as well if you want. We're going to start the design process by just creating a very rough sketch of the different elements we want to draw, so that when we move on to the colors, it's really easy and pretty straightforward. So just make sure you have an empty layer and then pick any color of your choice you like to sketch with. I like to sketch with just a neutral gray. And in terms of brushes, again, any brush you know you're comfortable with for sketching is going to work well. That could mean, for example, in the sketching panel, the HB pencil. And you can really draw any shape of your choice here for the panel, but one thing I would recommend is to zoom out so you can actually see the edges of your canvas so that you have a better idea of your composition. So again, you can draw really whatever shape you want. But if you want to do like I am doing, we're going to start with this kind of rounded triangle. And then we're just going to wrap an arrow around it. So just starting with the head of the arrow, so just a triangle. And then matching this vertical line from the triangle to the bottom part of the arrow, kind of like that. And then just connecting both. And if you want, you can also add metal poles to hold your sign. Now the beauty of sketching everything really quickly first before moving on to the colors is that if you want to move stuff around or experiment with different shapes and different proportions, it's really easy to do. So let's use the top of the arrow as an example. Let's say I wanted to move it either forward or backward. All I would have to do is use the selection tool here at the top. Setting it to freehand, I could then just draw a selection around my arrow. And with the arrow tool, I can then move it around, place it where I want it to be. I could also use the blue handles to resize it and even distort it if I want. So let's say I want it to be longer, I would just set it to distort and then stretch it. So take all the time you need here to build a sketch that you're happy with. It doesn't need to be clean in any way, as you can see. And once you're happy with your basic structure and composition, we're going to move on to the colors. Great, so once you have your sketch, you might actually want to rename the layer you used to sketch, just so that we have a well-organized file. In terms of adding the colors, there are a few different approaches that you could use depending on what you have available. And what I mean by that is that everything you see in here can be easily drawn with free brushes that come with Procreate, but that one I included as a freebie, a sample, however you want to call it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to talk to you about that brush later in the video when we're at the animation part. But to backtrack a little bit, you could really use any free brush that comes with Procreate to paint this. But you could also use brushes that are really quite popular in the market. A lot of creators have them, I have them, which are 3D brushes, and those can help you kind of draw everything all at once in one stroke. So I'm going to show you how to use 3D brushes for the rest of the sign, but again, it's the same technique, you have 2 different ways to do it. So let's start with technique number 1, which is kind of drawing 3D by hand with the free brushes. So we're going to do that for the arrow. For this first technique, we're just going to start by creating a solid shape for our arrow. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to put this layer below the sketch, and we are going to rename it to arrow. We're going to select the main color we want the arrow to be. If you're using the color palette, it's going to be this red right here. Otherwise, you can really pick whatever you want. This is the color we're going to use as the anchor, if I should say, to create the rest of the palette. So for now, don't worry too much about it. If you want more of a retro vibe though, I recommend going with a color that is kind of in the middle of this square right here. So as you can see, it's not super saturated, it's not too desaturated either, not too bright, not too dark, really kind of in the middle. Then with that color selected, you're going to pick a brush that doesn't have any texture to it and that you know you have good control over. So that could be, for example, in the inking pack that comes with Procreate, the Studio Pen. Oh, and I almost forgot, depending on the color you use for your sketch, it might be a good idea to go ahead and change the blending mode of your sketch to multiply. And without getting into all the details about multiply, just think of it as something that is going to allow our sketch to be very contrasted no matter which color is underneath. So that way we can go back on the arrow layer, start outlining everything, and we're going to be able to differentiate the sketch from the color really easily. Then all you have to do is trace the outline of your shape and fill it in. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave me a comment with what you're going to write on your sign. So for example, I would leave a comment with the word retro. Now, if you're new to the channel, you might be a bit confused with what this secret password thing is. It's kind of a game that we play in all my illustration videos. I hide a secret password for you guys to find. People seem to really like it, but the most important thing about it is that it does give me a lot of insight into how to edit and paste my videos better, which helps me to create better tutorials for you guys, and that's really super important. So again, just leave a comment with whatever word you're going to write on your sign, and then we're going to keep going. Once you have your silhouette, I recommend you hide your sketch and just make sure the silhouette itself looks good. It's probably going to be wonky in some areas, especially for a shape like the arrow because it's quite big, it's a big curve, so it's not the easiest to do. So feel free to pause the video here to take all the time you need to tweak your shape until you're really happy with it. And once you're done with that, I'm going to show you how to add some thickness to your shape. So to manually add thickness with the basic Procreate brushes, there are a few steps that we need to do. The first one is to duplicate our shape layer. So just swiping it towards the right with one finger, tapping duplicate, and then with the bottom layer selected, picking the arrow tool and moving the layer towards where we want the thickness to be. And for now, it's not going to look like thickness, but it's just because we need to change the color of it. So once you've moved the shape, you can just exit the arrow tool, and then picking a slightly darker version of your main color. So if you're working with the color palette, the darker version of the red is right here, but otherwise you can see it's the same color, just darker. And then you can drop that onto where you know your shape is. So I know I just moved mine towards the bottom, so I just went ahead and dropped on there. Now we can already see that there's a little bit of a thickness, but there's some gap as well. This looks more like a shadow than thickness. So we're going to need to manually connect the little gaps right here. So with the same brush, same color, making sure that we are on the bottom layer, you just need to go over and fill in any weird gaps that you have, mostly on corners and very intense curves. Now, just so we don't get confused with our layers, we're going to rename the bottom arrow layer, so the one that is the darkest, that is the thickness, to arrow thickness. And if you want to bring your shape to the next level, you might want to add some shading within the thickness. Now to do that very quickly in Procreate, you can activate what is called Alpha Lock on that layer. So to do that, just take 2 fingers and swipe your arrow thickness layer towards the right. You can also manually activate Alpha Lock within the menu, it's right here. And what Alpha Lock does is now everything we draw on the arrow thickness layer is going to stay within the color that is already there, so within that shape. Which means we can go back in with an even darker version of a red. I don't have it in the color palette for some reason, but yeah, just almost black. And with a soft brush, like from the airbrushing pack, again, a brush that comes with Procreate, the soft brush, you can go and lightly brush a shadow at the very bottom of that thickness line. Great, so that is method 1 for creating thick shapes. I'm going to show you how to do it if you have 3D brushes as well. Otherwise, you can just repeat these steps to create the different other shapes that you might have in your sign. So if you have 3D brushes, or if you just want to learn, how 3D brushes work in Procreate, We're going to create this other part of the sign, the blue part, with a 3D brush. So instead of having to draw the main shape and then the thickness separately, it's all going to be just one big stroke. So go ahead and create a new layer and put it below the arrow. And I'm going to rename mine to blue shape, but just rename it to whatever your shape is going to be like. And you can totally eyeball which color you want to use here. But in Procreate, within the color panel, there's a super handy tool, which is the harmony option here. So for example, if we go back and pick the red that we used for our arrow, if you go in the harmony tool here, you're going to see the color wheel with a few suggestions, which are Procreate kind of mathematically calculating which colors would go well with the one you have selected. So you can see right now I have analogous selected, which means Procreate is giving me two colors that work well and are pretty similar to the one I have selected. But if you want something super different, you could go and instead of analogous, pick complementary, which is going to give you the color that is opposite on the color wheel. So you could totally pick that and use that as your secondary color. Otherwise, you could also navigate through the other options and pick other colors that are totally different and just see which ones would work well with whatever you have in mind. So that way you can super quickly create a color palette that you know is going to look good with your sign. Now here, just so I'm coherent with the color palette I'm providing, I'm going to use the blue that I have, which is this one right here. Like I said earlier in the video, 3D brushes are really popular right now. I don't know how all of them work. The one I made work in a way that you can pick two different colors and then Procreate is going to use the two colors you picked and merge them to create kind of this 3D effect. So if you're using any brush from my 3D bundle, which by the way will be linked in the description below with a special promo code as usual if you want to check it out, you're going to need to pick a darker version of the main color you're using for this other shape. So for example, here again, I have my bright blue, and then right next to it, I need to select not white, a darker version of my color. So you could again do it manually, or if you're using the color palette, it's going to be this dark blue right here. And one quick note, if you are using brushes from my 3D bundle, it's really important that you pick the darker color last, and that is the one that is selected here at the top. Otherwise, the 3D effect is going to look inverted, so what is supposed to be light is going to be dark, and your shadows aren't going to be light, which is obviously not optimal. And once you have your color selected, you really just have to pick whatever brush you want. Now here we want something that is thick, so not necessarily like a metal or glossy effect. So we're going to go instead of the material pack, which is more metal, chrome stuff, we're going to go in the thickness pack. I know I want to have a flat top, so a top that is a solid color, no texture to it. And I know I want my thickness to be fairly short, so I'm going to go with flat top, short. And then you just have to reactivate your sketch so you can see what you're drawing, and then draw your shape. So if I zoom in, as you can see, the thickness is already there and there's already a shadow within that thickness, so it really just took one stroke. We do need to fill in the top though, but that's really easy. Just go ahead and select the light version of your color, and then picking any super basic solid brush, so that could be in the airbrushing panel, the hard brush, and then you can just fill in the top. So if you have any other shape, take all the time you need to draw them here, and then we're going to move on to adding the details like the background, the rust effect, the lights, and all of this. Great, so now that we have the basic shapes, we're going to move on to making them look good because right now it's really boring and flat. The first thing we're going to do is make sure we're working on the background that is similar to what we're going to have in the end so that the contrast and the different effects we add look good with the background. So if you're planning on having this sign be part of a bigger illustration, just go ahead and pick whatever color you feel is going to represent the illustration the most. Otherwise, we're just going to set our background to a nice dark charcoal gray. So I'm going to show you a few different elements that you can add to really make your piece pop, and you can totally mix and match. So for example, I'm going to show you how to add rust. I'm going to add it on the blue part, but you could add it wherever. I'm going to show you how to add a lighter border around the arrow, but again, you could add that wherever you want. I'm also going to show you how to have texture within the main shapes and how to create the poles. So you can really go off script here and apply the details in a different position or differently than what I'm about to do. We're going to start by painting some rust, which is going to bring a lot more texture within the piece. So for the rust, we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to put this layer above whichever shape we want the rust to be on. So in my case, I want it to be on the blue, so I'm just going to create a new layer here and rename it to rust. Now, one thing that is important is that we want this rust to stay within the shape. We don't want rust in the background, of course. So we're going to apply the layer as a clipping mask, so just tapping on the layer and then selecting clipping mask in the menu so that whatever we draw on the rust layer is now going to stay within the shape that is right under it. And the good news here is that Procreate does have a very good rust brush, so just going in the brush panel, you can pick, it is in the industrial pack I think, yes, the Rusted Decay brush. And you're going to start with a nice chocolatey brown, so something quite dark. And you're going to have to experiment with the size of your brush, but you probably want to go with something quite big because here you don't want to draw your rust, you want to stamp it instead. Now this is a good start, but it looks more like blood or dirt, so we're going to make it look like rust by adding a really intense orange. So in the color palette, it's going to be this one right here, otherwise you can see it's quite bright and quite saturated. And you could totally go ahead here and just add some stamps of that bright orange, but that's starting to be very intense in terms of the texture. So what I recommend doing instead is activating Alpha Lock on your rust layer, which if we remember means everything we draw on the rust layer because of Alpha Lock is going to stay within the rust shape that we already have. So that way we can stamp a bit of orange, but instead of layering and creating a big blob that is super massive, it's just going to add a bit more color variation within the rust that was already there. Now if you find that to be a little bit too intense, which I think I find it to be a bit too intense, you always have the option to just lower the opacity of your rust layer a little bit so it blends with the background. The exact number is really just up to your personal preference, but that can definitely help make it look a little bit more realistic. Similarly to rust, you might want to add texture on the big shapes that you have so that they look a little bit less flat. So let's use the arrow as the example this time. So we're just going to create a new layer above the arrow. We're going to rename it to texture. And once more, we're going to apply it as a clipping mask on the arrow so that it stays within the shape. And there are a few textures that you can use that come with Procreate. I think still in the industrial pack, actually just below the rust, the concrete block could look really cool. And here you're just going to go back and pick the base color you use for your arrow or any other shape that you want to add texture to. Now, if we paint, it's not going to look like anything because it's the same color, obviously. So we're going to change the blending mode of this texture layer. For now, we're going to set it to multiply, but you can really experiment depending on the vibe you want. And once you have a blending mode activated, you can just go over your shape and gently brush your texture. So you can see that already it looks so much more alive. And you can always go back and just scroll through the different blending modes and just see if there's one that you like more than the others. I think I actually like multiply a lot. It's a little bit too intense, so I'm just going to go ahead and lower my opacity. Another strategy you can use to make your piece pop even more is to add a little bit of an outline on some shapes, like here I have it on the arrow. To do that, again, super easy, just creating a new layer above whichever shape you want your outlines to be on. And then renaming this layer to, let's go with outlines actually. And applying it as a clipping mask as well so that it stays within the shape that we have. Then very simple, you just pick a lighter version of the main color of that shape. In my case here in the color palette, it's going to be this kind of salmon pink right here. And then going back to the most basic brush we have in the airbrushing panel, the hard brush. You can then just do a few scribbles and play with the size of the brush until you have something that you like for your outlines. And then it's pretty straightforward, you just go around your shape and add some outlines. We can also add some metal poles, so super easy as well, just creating a new layer below everything that you have so far and renaming it to poles. Now you can really have any color of your choice here. I'm going to go with just gray, so in the color palette it's going to be this medium one right here. And then still with the hard brush from the airbrushing pack that comes with Procreate, you can just draw your poles. If you have them in your sketch, you can reactivate your sketch as well. And then just drawing the shape of the poles. And the poles are definitely not the main part of this illustration, but leaving them like that is just so boring and flat. So we're going to quickly go ahead and activate Alpha Lock on the poles. And then we're going to pick from the airbrushing pack, again, brushes that come with Procreate, is the medium brush. Now with the medium brush, we're going to paint some shadows, so just picking a darker version of your gray, and the color palette is going to be this one right here. And then you're just going to gently brush over one side of the poles. We're also going to add a curved shadow right below the sign. So for that, making sure your brush is quite small so you have a lot of control over it. The exact number is going to depend on the size of your canvas, but you can experiment, of course. And then right below your sign, you're going to draw a slightly curved shadow like this. And you're just going to repeat whenever you have an overlap between the sign and the pole. We're also going to add some highlights, so this time it's going to be a lighter version of your base gray, and the color palette, it's this one right here. And then almost in the middle, but just a little bit more to the side that is opposite to your shadow, you're going to draw a little bit of highlight. And the last thing we have to do before adding the lights and creating the animation is adding some text. So to do that, just go in the wrench icon menu, and from the Add submenu, select Add Text. It's going to open up a blue box that you can put wherever you want. And if you don't see your text right now, it's probably just because your text layer is below your shapes. So just take it and put it wherever it needs to be. In my case, I want it to be on the blue shape, but I don't want it to be a clipping mask. So if you see a little arrow that appears, just make sure you tap on the layer and deactivate clipping mask. And from there, you can go back, tap Edit Text, and type in whatever you want. Here, I'm just going to go with retro. Now, if you want to customize the font and everything, you can just double tap on your text so it's all selected, and then tapping on the two A's right here, which is going to open up the full font customization menu. So I'm going to go with this one right here, DIN, I'm not sure, condensed. I want everything to be caps, so I'm going to activate this right here. And I'm going to play with the size until I have something I like. So you can really play with your text as much as you want here, and then once you're done, just tapping on the arrow to exit this menu, you can position it wherever you want, and you could also resize it from the arrow tool here. It doesn't have to be within the text option. Now you could totally keep your text just white like this, but I'm being very extra in this video. I want all the details to be right, so I'm actually going to add a bit of a border around the text. Now with the text tool that comes with Procreate, you don't have to manually draw it like we did on the arrow, you can do it just automatically. So really all you have to do is duplicate your text layer, then selecting the top one, clicking Edit Text, going back to the two A's, and tapping on this O right here, which is going to create the outlines. And while you're in this menu, you can also recolor your outlines. So I want mine to be a dusty yellow, so you can just go ahead, select your text, and then select whichever color you want it to be. In my case, again, I want a dusty yellow, so I'm going to go with the color palette with this one right here. It's kind of this banana color. And it makes me realize that my original text was not white, it was actually gray. So I'm just going to go back, select that layer, and set it to white. And if you want to be even more extra, you could also add a drop shadow below your text. So to do that, you would create another copy of your text, just duplicating it again, and then selecting the bottom one. Similarly to what we did to add texture here, you're going to use the arrow tool to move your text slightly lower than it is right now. And then you're going to set this layer to whichever color you want your shadows to be. I'm going to go with the same blue I used for my thickness, so this right here. You can then go ahead and of course lower the opacity if you feel like your shadows are a bit too much. And if you feel like your shadows are a little bit too sharp, you could go ahead and with your shadow layer selected, going in the adjustment menu, picking Gaussian blur, and then adding as much or as little blur as you want. Quick note though, doing that is going to rasterize your text layer, so it's going to become regular pixels like anything else you paint. It's not going to be text anymore, so you won't be able to edit it, but it's pretty simple. If you want to change something, you just change it on your main layer and then duplicate it again and just repeat the couple steps that we just did. Okay, so we have only one thing left by now. It's probably the simplest, but the most fun and the one that is going to make the biggest difference, the lights. And like I said earlier in the video, I do have a free brush that is going to help us to paint these lights very quickly. But first, we just need to organize the file a little bit because right now it's quite messy. So we're just going to group all the layers we have, starting from the poles up to whichever layer you have at the top. And then you're going to group that and collapse the group and rename it to whatever your sign is. At this stage, we can probably get rid of the sketch as well, so just delete. And then we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to rename this layer to lights. Now if I zoom in my example here, we can see that the light bulbs that are off actually have this kind of sphere effect to them. And this is where the free brush I mentioned earlier comes into play. Now of course you could do this step with just a solid circle, so no texture within it. That can totally work, but if you do want to have this brush, again, it is free. I will link in the description below. And it's also part of my 3D bundle, so if you have the 3D bundle, it is in the 3D material pack, the Metal Dots brush. So since this is one of my 3D brushes, we're going to need to pick two colors. The first one is going to be the lighter color, so we're going to go with this super bright yellow right here. And then the second color is going to be a slightly darker version of our yellow. And if you're just going with solid circles here, so you're not using the Metal Dots brush, only pick the darker version, the yellow, not the super light one. And then in one tap, you can create your light bulbs. Now you're going to have to play with the size to see what works for your piece, but once you have the size, it's really easy. You just go over and tap to place your light bulbs. Of course, you always have the option to use the selection tool to move any light bulb that is not exactly where you want it to be. For example, for some reason, this one I feel is it's just not right. So I'm going to quickly move it. And once you're happy with the positioning of your bulbs, we're going to create a copy of the layer to create a dark version of the bulbs. So just duplicating this light and renaming the copy to Lights Off. With the Lights Off layer selected, you can then go in the adjustment panel here at the top, selecting Hue, Saturation, and Brightness, and lower the brightness of your bulbs to whatever you want. So these are pretty good. They look off, but if we hide them, the ones that are supposed to be on are not super bright, like they're not shining. So with the regular light layer selected, we're going to go back in the adjustment panel, and this time we're going to select Bloom. You're then going to take one finger and you're going to swipe towards the right until it says Bloom 100%, and you're going to see that your lights totally come to life. And you can totally play with the settings here at the bottom to see if there's a specific setting you like. But one thing that is super important is to make sure your size remains pretty small, because if it's too big, the different lights are going to start blending together, and then it's going to be really hard to do the animation. So make sure your size is small enough so you can see where the different lights end. So now we have all the elements that we need, we just need to animate everything. So we're going to go in the wrench icon menu here at the top, and in the canvas submenu, we're going to activate Animation Assist right here. So if we click play at this stage, it's just going to alternate between the different layers we have, which is definitely not what we want. So we need to tell Procreate that the sign we have here should remain as the background at all time. Now the way to do that is to go in this frame menu here, locate the frame that has the sign, tap on it, and activate the background option. Now if you don't see the background option, it's a pretty easy fix. It just means you have a layer between your background color and your sign group, so make sure you don't have anything between those, and then you're going to be able to activate background. So now that we have the sign as a background, we're actually going to put the light bulbs that are off within that group so that they're part of the background as well. So we're just going to reactivate that check mark, open the group, and put them at the top of the group. Again, if they automatically get applied as a clipping mask, just make sure that you deactivate that. So here it's pretty simple. All we have to do is erase some of the lights that are on so that we can see the light bulb. But we're not going to just erase them, otherwise we're going to lose them forever. We're going to create what is called a layer mask. Double tapping on your light layer and then selecting Mask. Now I'm not going to get into all the details about layer mask in this video because it's already long enough as it is. If you want more information about how to use masks, I have a full video about them. I will link in the description below. For now, we're just going to pick our eraser tool, and we're going to set the eraser to the medium brush, and then we're just going to erase every other light. Now to create the animation, it's going to be super easy. We're just going to duplicate this lights layer. Then we're going to tap on the layer mask and select invert. And now if we go back and click play, we can see that the lights are shining. And if you feel like the movement is too fast, just go in the settings and play with the frames per second and set it to whatever you want it to be. One last very important thing, if you want to export this animation and post it on Instagram or Facebook, the video needs to be at least 3 seconds long. Now the way to know how long your animation is to count how many frames you have, not counting the background, so in my case I have 2, and dividing that number by whatever you set for frame per second. So for example, I have 2 frames and I have 4 frames per second, so 2 divided by 4 means right now my animation is half of a second long. So if your animation is too short, all you have to do is duplicate your different layers to create copies of the frame. And you can do that very quickly by just selecting all the layers you need to duplicate and then dragging them onto the canvas, which is going to create a copy, as you can see here. So if I click play, we can see the animation is still the same, but right now we have 4 frames, which means 4 divided by 4, I now have 1 second. So I can just repeat the step until I have enough frames for 3 seconds. And once you have enough frames, it's really easy to do the export. You just go in the wrench icon menu. In the share submenu at the bottom, you're going to see animated MP4. Then making sure the frame per second here is the same as what you had set, you just tap on export and then select where you want to save your file. I recommend selecting save as video because then it's going to save it as a regular video in your camera roll, so you can just use that however you want. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn how to create more animations in Procreate, I highly recommend you check out this playlist because I have a bunch more videos for you. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.